can't see you up there. All right? And sometimes I'll go down that aisle. And sometimes I may go across. And sometimes I'll get excited. In fact, I'll get excited a lot. And those of you who are visiting for the first time, who've never heard me preach or never seen any of my DVDs, I want you to know usually I tell a joke or two. You know? If you can't make it as a comedian, you become a pastor. I've heard that many times. And I often tell human interest stories. But this morning, the subject we're going to talk about doesn't lend itself to that. I can't tell jokes about fear. So I'd like to begin by asking you, what happened 15 years ago today?
9/11.
9/11. 9/11. Here's the official description of 9/11, of what happened. The attacks killed 2,996 people, injured over 6,000, caused at least $10 billion in property damage and infrastructure damage of nearly $3 trillion. 4 passenger airliners operated by 2 major U.S. passenger air carriers were hijacked by 19 al-Qaeda terrorists. And 2 of the planes at American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center complex in New York City. Within an hour and 42 minutes, both of them came down. And when they came down, the fires and the shock wave took down all other buildings in the World Trade Center, including the 47th tower, 7 World Trade Center tower, as well as significant damage to 10 other structures. A 3rd plane was crashed into the west wing of the Pentagon, and another one tried to get to the White House. In case you don't know where it was headed, that's where it was going. And given the success of the other 3, if the passengers on board that flight above Pennsylvania had not been brave, the White House would be gone. Raise your hand if you can tell me where you were and what you were doing on 9/11. Amen. Some of you are old enough to remember D-Day. Some of you remember Pearl Harbor. All of us remember JFK. And the World Trade Towers, 9/11, will fall into that category. Do you know that high school freshmen have no emotional experience of 9/11? And most college kids have no emotional experience with 9/11. And what was the #1 emotion? Well, I shouldn't say that. There were a couple of emotions that were felt that day. Anger happened to be one of them. But the next Sunday, churches and synagogues across America were filled with people. Why? Why did people show up after 9/11 in church? Why? Anyone? Fear. And they wanted to make sense of what happened. But they were fearful. They were terrified. They didn't know what was going to happen next. We have 3 sons. They're no longer boys, they're men. But then, 2 of them had just gone off and started careers. They were in different cities. And one was still in high school, or in college. One was in college. And within an hour of those towers coming down, Dad got a phone call from all 3 sons, wherever they were, and they all asked the same question. First words out of their mouth, independent of all of their brothers. They asked this question: Dad, is this the end of the world? Is that not a question of fear? And I was able to say to them, no biblical passage I've ever read says it goes down this way, so no, this is not the end. I'm pretty sure this is Osama bin Laden's work. And I said, one day you'll read about him riding a camel across the desert and falling down a well. And I can assure you it's a SEAL team that did it. It didn't happen that way, but it did happen. But 9/11 puts within us a sense of fear. Anything is possible. I read this week about North Korea bragging once again about their ability to have a nuclear bomb. If that doesn't cause fear in your gut, you're not aware of world politics. That is terrifying. As I said when I preached the candidating sermon, I want to make sure that we all understand the word that we're talking about. So when I use the word fear, I would like someone to raise their hand and give me a basic definition of the word fear so that we're all on the same page, all right? Who's brave enough to give me a definition of fear? All right? Hopelessness. That's good. What else? Fear. Come on. Surely you know what the word means. Just be brave. Raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. Terror. All right? The official definition is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something dangerous is about to happen that will cause either pain or mental distress. That covers it, right? Fear. Synonyms for fear are fright, terror, alarm, panic, agitation, or terror. Now, I want you to understand something, okay? There's nothing wrong with fear. It is part of God's design. We are created to experience fear periodically, and it's necessary. I was coming home from work one day, many years ago, and I was driving along, and I suddenly noticed the car over there was going like this, and then like this. It went from that grassy area on that side of the road to that one, to that one. And my mind went, I think he's drunk. And I got over as far as I could, and sure enough, he was messed up. Fear is a good thing, periodically, because it helps us survive. It's part of God's design. And we have to protect ourselves because of fear. And you probably already know this, but some very powerful chemicals pump through your body when you feel fear. And it's designed that way so that you'll have extra strength and extra mental clarity. And you'll have the extra ability to do something extraordinary, like lift a car off a child. But what happens is, as human beings, we see ordinary things, and we go, and we turn it into a life or death thing, and that all those chemicals pump into our body, but then we don't lift the car. And all those chemicals have to go somewhere, and they have to do something. And they start eating you up from the inside out. It's not good to be afraid all the time. God created us to be afraid periodically, but not all the time. In fact, God created and gave to His believers in Jesus Christ the gift of peace. It says in Philippians 4:5-7, which I have on another page, that we are not to be afraid. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds forever. That is our gift from God as believers. But what do? We live and operate in fear. This morning I'm going to read you a passage of Scripture from one of the Gospels. And that if you don't believe the Bible is true, if you don't believe the Bible is full of humans, regular, ordinary people, this story ought to convince you. We're going to talk about the two guys walking along the road to Emmaus this morning. And hidden in that discussion is their fears. I'm going to read to you Luke chapter 4, verses 13-27. I'm going to stop at 27 today, because I realized that my personal announcements would make it a little longer, so I'm trying to be honoring of your time. Behold, hear now the word of the Lord. Behold, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things which had taken place. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are these words that you're exchanging with one another as you're walking?" And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem that's unaware of the things which have happened here these days?" And he, meaning Jesus, said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "The things about Jesus, the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people. And now the chief priests and rulers have delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all of this, it is the third day since these things happened. But also, some women among us amazed us. When they went to the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it exactly as the women had also said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things, to enter into his glory? And then beginning with Moses, with all the prophets, he explained to them all of the things concerning himself in the Scriptures. The Word of God for the people of God. The proper response would be amen or praise the Lord. I won't do this every sermon because the purpose I'm up here for is about Jesus Christ, not about Dave Richardson. But for the first couple of 3 sermons, if something fits from my life that might both share who I am and yet make the point, I'm going to include a personal story. I'm going to do that this morning. I graduated from college in 1971. Go ahead, do the math. It was from a small liberal arts college in Marietta, Ohio. I was a music major. I play and I sing and pick the guitar a little bit. Don't ask me to do that in front of friends. Shortly after I graduated, I joined the Air Force. It was Vietnam days. I had a draft number, but I had a way out. I had a ticket to seminary. I could easily have walked away. But I chose to volunteer because I didn't want to wear a yellow stripe down my back for the rest of my life. So soon after graduating from college, 8 months later, I graduated from tech training school and basic training. I had gotten married. I had orders to Turkey, the country, not the bird. And I found myself on an airplane, a gigantic airplane, flying 16 hours in a row over a great big ocean to a new country. This kid, who'd been on an airplane 7 times in his life, no longer than an hour each time, was on an airplane to start a new job with a new wife in a new country in a culture like nothing he'd ever been in before at the age of 22. I was scared, man. I didn't know what to expect, you know. They were Turks. Who knew what they could do? I was very fearful about the future, and I had many hours to think about it. And I had just about gotten myself calmed down. The bus came to the airport and picked us up and took us through Istanbul on the way to the base, and we went by Taksim Square. And there were 3 posts hanging in the middle of Taksim Square in 1972. And there were burlap bags hanging on those posts. And the bus driver said, "They just hung the leaders of the student rebellion. Now I'm really afraid." That's a true story. It is natural to feel fear. It is not natural to live in fear. The 2 people walking along the road to Emmaus had expected a Messiah to be a warrior king. They expected the next King David. White horse, handsome guy, flowing hair, big muscles, commanding personality. Actually, I'm describing me. And here comes this guy from Nazareth, and he's all soft-spoken. But he does these really amazing things, but he doesn't have a sword. And he lets the Romans push him around. And so these 2 guys, unnamed disciples we call these are 2 unnamed disciples. They are walking the road to Emmaus after Jesus' death. Because although he looked like and acted like the Messiah, but he wasn't a warrior king. And then he did something totally unexpected. He got killed. Now and they are really flummoxed. They walk along this road to Emmaus and they're talking, they have lots of time on their hands, and they're trying to figure out, was he really the Messiah? And they argue both sides of the points. They got all kinds of time. And this is what they're discussing when Jesus walks up behind them. We don't know why they're going to Emmaus. Maybe they got friends there. Maybe they're bored. Maybe they want to get out of town, lay low. But they're walking along, and they are very fearful because it occurs to them. gather up everybody that's been seen walking behind Jesus. Reminds me of the old preacher's phrase, if they had to go on the witness of the people who work with you and live with you and your neighbors, would there be enough evidence? Would there be enough witnesses to testify to your Christianity so you can be crucified? Huh? Just a long way to go for nothing, huh? And so Jesus walks up on them and begins to talk to them, and he primes the pump by asking them, what are you talking about? They were filled with fear. I think there's a great parallel between those two disciples and you and I this morning. I think there's a remarkable parallel. You see, the two disciples thought they knew what the Messiah would look like. They thought they knew what the Messiah would do. They thought they knew what was going to happen, but they got a total surprise. It didn't happen the way they thought it was going to happen, and they saw the future with fear. When you had Pastor David here, extremely nice guy, I think he and I could be very good friends, but you knew what to expect. Nice guy, everything was comfortable, everybody was with it, and then here comes the new guy. What's he going to do? I mean, he's already put a color picture on the front of the cover of the bulletin. And he doesn't preach up there where he belongs. What is he going to do? And I'll bet you that causes a little bit of fear, particularly when he starts his ministry by saying, we're going to do some things differently. Isn't that scary? Well, Pam and I moved from Kansas to Indiana. And that's kind of scary. I mean, we've been there 6.5 years. We got very comfortable. I couldn't walk down the street or go to a grocery store or the gas station without somebody saying, hi, Pastor Dave. People knew us, and we were comfortable. And now it's all new again. Now my life is in total chaos. By the way, if you look in the dictionary, the synonym for chaos is moving. Just for the record. We, from a distance of 2,000 years, we look at those two apostles and we say, how could they be afraid? Look at what they saw. Look at what they heard. How could you watch Lazarus be raised from the grave and worry about the future? And yet they weren't. And they make a mistake that all of us make. And this is the point of the message this morning. They make the mistake that all believers make because we have short-term memory. And we get afraid of the future because we don't remember what has God done in my life in the past. How can you be afraid of the future if you look back and you see what God has done in the past? You want a prime, perfect example that hits home? How many of you know Butch? I don't even know his last name, but you know who Butch is, right? And you know what Butch's surgery was this past week or week and a half, right? You know what the odds of surviving pancreatic cancer are? Not good. Very low. Doctors in the house, anybody disagree with me? Butch survived surgery. Butch not only survived surgery, he went home. He's home this morning. Now I'm going to ask you something. Did Butch survive surgery because he's a good husband? Yes or no? Come on. It's audience participation time. No. Did Butch survive surgery because he's a nice guy?
No.
No. Did Butch survive surgery because he's a hard worker in church? He survived surgery because people of God prayed for him and asked for God's grace and mercy in that experience. Now I ask you, as he goes forward in his life, which may be real short, may be real long, as he looks at the future, should Butch be afraid? No. Because if he looks at his past experience, what God has done, he'll say, God is with me. And here's one of the points, folks. If God has been with you in the past, if God has walked with you in the past, why would you be so ignorant as to think he won't walk with you in the future? My God was in Kansas, in Stillwell, Kansas, and he walked with me day by day, and he said, this is where I want. I want you to be. Until last October, he said, Dave, I don't want you here anymore. We're leaving. And I said, you know, God, I'm pretty comfortable here. You know? I've gotten a good name in the community. People look at me and go, hey, he does good things for us. Are you sure? And the process began, which came here. And yes, I'm fearful. Should I be? Not if I look back and look at the experience of God and what He's done in the past. Do you and I do the same thing as those disciples? Max Lucado has written a book entitled Imagine Your Life Without Fear. I want to quote 2 paragraphs and we'll head for the barn here pretty quick. Someday I'll tell you what that expression means. My grandfather had 2 horses. When I was a little kid, I'd spend summers, a week of summers at the farm. And he would take the horses out. And one particular summer, he was gathering potatoes. And the horses were hot and sweaty. They'd been out there all day. They could just barely get their legs in front of them. Loaded up the sledge with potatoes and put me on top of it. He headed for the barn. And we got about 500 feet from the barn. And the horses' heads picked up and their feet picked up. And they took off running. And I said to Grandpa, what happened? What's the difference? Why are they so happy now? He said, they can smell the barn. That means the day is over. We're nearing the finish. All right? We're heading for the barn. Lucado says that fear has taken a 100-year lease on the building next door to your heart. And he set up shop there. And fear is oversized and rude. And he's unwilling to share the space with happiness. And so happiness complies and moves out. Have you ever heard the 2 words together? Can one be happy and afraid? Can one be clear thinking and afraid? Can one be loving and afraid? Can one be merciful and afraid? Can one be generous and afraid? Can one live in peace and be afraid? Fear never wrote a symphony or a poem, never negotiated a peace treaty or cured a disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear never saved a marriage or a business. Faith did that. We live in fear. You know what fear is? Fear is the loss of control. You think you've lost control. And that's the antithesis of being a Christian. All right. I'm going to head for the finish line here. The reality is that you and I we live life in one of 3 ways. We live in fear. We put our head in the sand. We say, oh, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing going on. North Korea's just fine. Or we live in faith. All right? And there are very few people many more live with their head in the sand. They either live in fear or faith. And I want you to know that God has chosen you to live in faith. And I have something I want you to do this morning. The Bible is of no use to us if we don't find a way to bring it home to our daily lives. And I'm going to bring the Bible home to your daily life, and I'm going to ask you to do something. All right? How do we remember what God has done for us in the past? We do a whole lot better if we write it down, particularly as I age. It helps. I know that's not your problem, but that's my problem. And so what I want you to do is I want you to begin to journal your relationship with God. Whether you can do that digitally, there's some smartphone apps for prayer journals. You can do it in a book that you go buy at, I was going to say Mardell's, but that may not mean anything. Go buy a diary or a journal, electronic or for real, and start writing down your relationship with God. If God spoke to you in the song of a bird, or a poem, or your neighbor's comments, or a magazine article, or something you saw on TV or the internet, write it down. If you heard a message that spoke to you, either someone else's or here, write it down. If God answers a prayer, write it down. Start to journal your life so that when the future gets rough, and it will get rough, you can look back at the past. Look at your past experiences with God to relieve your fear about the present and about the future. All right? I have more things that are on my heart, but the clock is ticking, and I know it's time to stop. Buy or get a prayer journal. Write down the things that God has done in your life. And when you get fearful, go back and read them. Let's bow our heads. Holy Father, thank you for this word this morning. And may it mean something to us. That you did not design us to live in fear, although you gave us the instinct of fear. fear for a reason. You designed us to live in peace as believers, trusting not in ourselves, trusting not in our own control, but trusting in your control, giving control to your Holy Spirit who lives inside of us. And that way, we'll have peace. I pray, Father, for each person gathered in this room who is fearful this morning about something, that they would give that fear to you right now. They would consciously, internally say to you, Holy Father, I give you my fear, and in its place I accept the fact that you have my best interest at heart. Be with us as a church family and help us to do the same. These things I ask in your holy and blessed name. Amen. And we're going to end the service different this morning because of the hour. We're going to stand up.